There are legal implications for substances that have been assigned a workplace exposure limit. Under the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health (COSH) regulations, employers are to prevent or control exposure to hazardous substances. Under COSH, control is defined as adequate only if following three conditions are met. 1. The principles of good control practice are applied. 2. Any workplace exposure limit is not exceeded. And 3. Exposure to asthmagens, carcinogens and mutagens are reduced to as low as is reasonably practicable. Now let's have a look at how does HSE define these limit values. HSE has a standard approach to assign workplace exposure limits to workplaces in the UK. In cases where there is evidence to support the introduction of a new or revised workplace exposure limit, HSE will follow its own approach. The substance will be assessed and analysed by relevant specialists, including an economic assessment. The Workplace Expert Health Committee, WHEC, will act as independent experts to review the scientific basis for any workplace exposure limit proposed. There will be a public consultation on the updates before the HSE board approves the new standard. Once approved, the new workplace exposure limits are made available as a published document called EH40, which contains all updated workplace exposure limits. Finally, let's look at the international standards related to workplace exposure limits. Particularly, across the Atlantic in the US, where National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, is responsible for setting standards of health and safety at work. Workplace exposure limits in the US are called Occupational Exposure Limits, OEL. For chemicals where OEL are set, the system is similar to HSE defined well. NIOSH has also suggested a system of occupational exposure banding, in addition to OELs. This applies to the chemicals that lack OEL. The NIOSH occupational exposure banding allows employers to quickly and accurately assign chemicals into specific categories called bands. Bands are based on a chemical's toxicological potency and the adverse health effects associated with exposure to the chemical. Each occupational exposure band from A to E has a defined exposure limit range. It allows the employers to take timely actions and ensure safety at work.